Hello, welcome to the Growing Leaders Podcast. This podcast exists because the topic of growing a next generation of leaders is an extremely hot one. If you are a business leader, you care about developing a next generation of employees and young leaders. And if you're a business, same thing. If you are a church leader, you really care about this topic. You probably have meetings all the time about this kind of stuff and strategy concepts and read articles and download podcasts like this one. And then if your church is, of course, the same. But for everyone else, the honest truth is we all know that you are building your organization right now by what you're doing to develop leaders for tomorrow. It's a big deal. However, maybe the people who care most about this conversation are young leaders themselves. If you're a young leader, you want to grow, you want to be healthy, you want your life to matter, and you want to be able to get ready for a life that matters. So for all those reasons, here we are. My name is Jamie Johnson. I'm one of your hosts. And then across from me, across the table is...
Hi, it's Christine Emmet.
Yes, Christine's trouble. Be ready. Watch your wallets. But with that, I just told you why we're here every time we're here. But why are we here today?
Well, today we're going to be hearing it from this really cool group of people themselves that are leading a different kind of youth ministry here in Gwinnett County, which is right here in our own backyard. And
wait, where's Gwinnett County if I'm not from here?
Good question. So Gwinnett County is a county just north of Atlanta, Georgia. It's a population of about 900,000, which is competing with the population of the city of Atlanta. It is predominantly, it's a mixed county. You know, you have people from all over the world. I believe it's 98 spoken languages here in Gwinnett County. But this group of young people, they are uniquely situated for this kind of youth work because they're also from all over. But they are running a very different kind of youth group, and we'd love to hear about it. But before that,
that's great.
I had a couple questions for you, Jamie.
Oh my gosh.
You know, questions.
I'm ready.
So in youth, you were a youth pastor one time yourself.
I was, yes, and I survived it.
You did. I was never a youth pastor, but I did lead a college ministry with my husband. True. You know, there's lots of styles of youth ministry. You know, there's like the smoke machines and like full worship band. There's where it's just like a few people in a basement of a church. But there's a lot of shifts happening in the church today. You know, we're in a postmodern world. And there are actually a lot of young people themselves leaving the church and either leaving the church altogether or going to something just more traditional because they want to feel safe and like they want the hymns and they want to be told kind of what to do next. But can you tell me a little bit about an Abbey church? What is an Abbey and why is it important today?
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of the things you're talking about in youth ministries, that was the playbook that came out of the 80s and 90s. You built these attractional, hypercharged, really cool moments. I remember I was in California a few years ago and this youth group had rented a boxing ring for their youth meeting to take place, at least the speakers. And you could win a car if you came. So that has happened. But increasingly over the last few years, it just doesn't have traction. And it leads to actually a bigger question of if that what we've learned through groups like Willow Creek and some of the big groups across the country. Studies have shown that if you attract people to be consumers, they stay consumers. And specifically the next generation, that how do you compete with the quality of content that's out there? They're getting content constantly. Trying to just be a consumeristic, cool church that attracts and develops young people just doesn't work. So what you're putting out there is what's an Abbey, and a really interesting idea. The idea of Abbey came out of St. Patrick, who was a missionary from England to Ireland. He's the first missionary outside of the Roman Empire. And basically the way that he did what he did is he created teams. So there were two parts to it. There was an apostolic, which just means a sent team that was kind of strategically engaging the community. And then at the same time, there was the Abbey Church. So you had a church functioning alongside a group that's going out to help build the educational processes, the artistic endeavors of a city. And it was really cool. Our good friend, Dr. Robert Grant, he has talked about that you could belong before you believed. So you're engaging out into a city where you're helping, you're demonstrating God's kindness, you're adding something to the community. And then not necessarily doing that so that everybody shows up at your church, but because you're so relevant, because you're so impactful, because you're incarnating who Jesus is, your church does grow. And there is a church alongside it. And the reason you're mentioning that as far as youth groups, I would imagine, is because, and maybe you could talk about this, that is way more attractive to young leaders or potential young leaders, or let's just say young people, than the boxing ring is. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, if I think about what Jesus did with his group of young people, he didn't call them to...
Good person to use
I
as the
know.
example. Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes we forget.
Yeah.
But he didn't call them to a building to just like go do stuff or to give them stuff. It was like, oh yeah, come with me. Let's go do this thing. And then he showed them, but then he was just like, you do it now. It's your turn. Which as a young person, that would have been way more attractive to me. You know, sitting in a room and just being like told lots of content. You get content all day at school. You get content, especially nowadays, you get content on your phone, on your computer. But no one's really showing you how to like live life. I really liked what you said, the belong before you believed, because if we're talking about evangelism, we're eventually wanting people to get to a place of believing. But if they can belong and be a part of something while they're on their journey to believing, that's really interesting. And I would think really attractive.
Yeah, the thing that's fascinating if you're a young person is, and this is like a bomb that we're just going to go ahead and throw down really early in this podcast that I think will, maybe you'll remember this, is it's really, really easy right now for the younger generation to struggle with the older generation, and for the older generation to struggle with the younger generation of what they know of each other by consuming content and watching the news. What's really true is if you get people together across generations right now, specifically if they know Jesus, they do really well together. But most people are not together. They've been in their homes. We've just gone through a lot of the pandemic. And so it really puts people in a tough situation. So you listen to a lot of people talking bad about the next generation. And there are big differences. There's been a massive shift. But some of the shifts hurt a little bit. Some of them, honestly, the next generation is going to have to confront and overcome those things. Some of them, though, make them even more open to Jesus than the previous generation was. And there's real traction points. And one of the things that you're talking about there is young people today are looking for authenticity. And young people today are looking for it to work. They're pragmatic. They want to see these things work in their lives. And so the great thing about Abbey is that it offers an opportunity for equipping, for going, for doing, to see the things that they're reading about in the Bible happen in their lives. And that is great. And as you said, that's the way Jesus did it. What's really, really interesting is you could get really concerned about, you're talking about belonging before you're believing. So you're going to water all this down and you're going to turn this into social work and stuff like that. Not at all. There's two parts to this. In an Abbey church, there is the church, and the church is rigorous. And it's a place where you can't just sit there, but you have to get up and go live out your faith. And that part is more rigorous in all truth. But the second part is that as you're going out and you're loving and you're building relationships in the community, you're not answering questions that aren't being asked. You're not pushing something on people when what they really, really need is help. And Jesus's capacity to go out into a community and to demonstrate kindness, which is God's practical help in his timing, God's way. When you provide that to a community, some people's hearts aren't open. The gospel of the kingdom is veiled. Their hearts are veiled. But some are ready. And with just a few weeks or a few months, sometimes a few years, they start to come alive. You're building kingdom relationships with them. And then it's almost like, whether it's your church or another church across the street, they start to come in strong. And that's what we've seen over and over again for churches that will go this direction, is that if they engage Abbey, not only does their church grow, but their city is changed.
I really liked the authenticity piece you mentioned earlier. And I think that's probably something important to remember for all of us. Especially with the pandemic. I mean, as everyone was at home, you were doing digital learning. And so you were consuming a lot of content on your computer. Then you'd get out of school and you'd consume a lot of content on your phone. And then you'd watch lots of this generation is they're professionals at consuming content. And so they move through it so quickly. But they are kind of at a point. They're at a brink where it's just they're looking for something real. And so can we set up our youth ministries or programs or even our conversations to get just down to real things?
Yeah, and that's the great thing of this moment, is that it's really God extending his hand to us, Jesus saying, will you follow me into the way that I do it, into my kingdom? And it's practical, and it's powerful, and it's real, and it's life-changing. And the good news is young people, and then they really love it. approaching it that way develops them to be a next generation of leaders for all of us.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I think we're about ready to have our group with us today.
All right. So these guys, what's going to happen? They will emerge, teleport right into right here.
Yeah, somehow magically they're going to be arrived into our conversation.
Okay, I don't think so. Rocky, our producer, is saying to me through these headphones that we should take a break. When we come back from the break, they'll be here, if that's all right.
I think that sounds pretty good.
All right.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here with our 3 leaders that we had mentioned earlier in this episode, and they're here to talk a little bit about their Abbey-like youth group, which you heard about Abbey Church earlier from Jamie, but we're going to get right into it. So
you scared me a little bit because you said you heard about it, and you were looking at me, and then you said from Jamie, and I thought, I am Jamie.
You should have been listening.
No, I got it. I follow you now. So, all right. So full disclosure about this group that we're letting on the screen right here, and they're dangerous. Watch them. The full disclosure is that we all work together. We're a part of a team called Boy the Ball that works in Africa, Latin America, and right here in Atlanta across the U.S. So we kind of know each other, and we have fun together. So I know this group well enough to know that they work together a lot, and they've got to have nicknames by this point. So Joey, does this work team, this amazing group of leaders doing amazing things here in Gwinnett County, Georgia, do they in fact have nicknames?
Well, Molly and I together are definitely Jolly.
Why?
I'm Joey, Molly's Molly.
Molly and I together are
that
Joey.
one we just smushed together.
So you're taking the J-O from Joey. Sorry.
Yeah. Jen, though, on her own in terms of nicknames. I wanted to call you the Niffer for a while when we first met, but you don't like being called anything other than Jen. So
it's too bad you don't have a Jenga brick.
But what is different about her actual name, Jennifer, is it's spelled with 2 F's and not 2 N's.
What if she's Django? No, that wouldn't work either. All right.
Some could say that Jen is a nickname.
It is.
Oh, Jen is her nickname. All right. It's got a ring to it.
Bold. Classic.
Good choice.
Great.
Well, great to hear about your nicknames. Hopefully we can come up with some more fun ones between Jen and Joe. But I'd like to start with Molly, if that's okay, Molly. You ready? You ready for this question?
I'm ready.
All right.
I hope so.
So you're each involved in 3 different unique youth outreaches. Can you tell me a little bit about the one that you are leading right now?
Yeah. So I am the current Velocity program director, which Velocity is our Love Your City initiative that takes place in schools. And so we currently implement Velocity in 2 high schools and 2 middle schools in Gwinnett County, Georgia. Velocity is a really unique mentoring program because high school students are actually trained and developed to then be mentors to middle school students. And so it's cross-age peer mentoring is the technical term for it, but it's really it is a cool initiative because there's a team of people kind of given to each high school, middle school pairing, and we go in and fight for, train, and develop this group of high school students. We really look to love them well, help them step into their purpose, but then also by the very nature of Velocity, it's designed to give high school students something that they're responsible for, which is a mentee, a middle school student, and they each week are together and we work through things like, what do you do when you're angry, or what does it mean to be a great friend? And so it's more socio-emotional, it's not tutoring, and it is a place where we get to be right alongside students in schools where they spend so much of their time fighting for them and helping them grow.
Earlier in today's podcast, we talked a little bit about the unique demographics of Gwinnett. So the schools that you guys are at, which are Berkmar and Central Gwinnett, and then the corresponding middle schools, those are some pretty diverse populations, right, Molly?
Yes, they're very diverse. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that at different points in our time at Berkmar, we've had I think over 40 countries represented just in terms of heritage and where kids are from. And then Central Gwinnett is equally diverse. I know at Central it is predominantly Black African American, but then Latino is the next highest population within Asian and white populations are the next two, and they are close. And then at Berkmar, it's people really truly are from everywhere. I've met people from Papua New Guinea, I've met people from Senegal, I've met people from Brazil, from Mexico, from Canada, met everybody at Berkmar.
Classic story at Berkmar one day is where two girls met each other in the program who were from Vietnam, who had grown up on the same street in Vietnam, never met, but met their first day in the program. That's just cool.
In high school in America.
In high school, yeah, in Georgia.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Okay.
We still know both of them.
Yeah, that's right. Molly, good job. All right, so we'll turn to Jen Gomez. Jen, you are leading the Love Your City Community Development Outreach Initiative. That's part of Boy the Ball's work in Norcross, Georgia, which is just a few miles from here. Could you tell us a little bit about Love Your City?
Sure. So we started around 2017. It started with a team of people that were going through various things. Our lives, several of us were going through pretty intense things. And then as an organization, it was a really difficult year. And so we just started meeting on Fridays and praying. We didn't talk a lot. I remember just kind of going into the house and really praying. And then the Lord really started moving in our hearts and changing circumstances and really speaking to us. And then we started reading Acts. And so right as we got to Acts 2:42, it's a really dynamic chapter where there's a group of people who are in and out of each other's homes. They're learning the apostles' teachings. They're sharing everything in common. And so we're like, we could be that group. But then at the end, it talks about thousands of people being added to their number. And so we said, well, it can't stay here in the circle. It has to be about us going out into a community. So we went down to Norcross and drove through a few neighborhoods. And honestly, it was probably the second neighborhood that we went into, kind of drove up and immediately started making friendships. It was like, I think it was 3 families outside on their porch talking, and they welcomed us and they started sharing about how long they had lived there. Many of them have lived there for over 15 years. And it was kind of the first place that they got to as they came from Central America and maybe South America. So it's a mostly immigrant population, probably 90% Latino. And so they started sharing information, and I could share that I was an immigrant as well and share some of my story with them. And then they said that there was something different about us. Like it was an immediate kind of trust. And I don't think it was specific to this neighborhood. I think it was just the fact that wherever the Lord is calling you to, then he gives grace for it. And so this was the neighborhood that we were called to, and he gave grace from that very beginning. And it's kind of the progressive flow of relationships. So at the beginning, you're just saying, this is my name, this is who we are. Do you have young people, and how can we serve them? And you're basically fighting for trust. You're kind of tearing down people's walls through consistency. So we're there week after week after week. And at some point, you get to a milestone in that relationship where you're not just a person that comes every Saturday, but then you're someone that could help in something. And so it's like practical help, whether it's going to a parent-teacher conference or maybe they needed a ride to the doctor or something like that. So we would do that as a chance to actually spend more time with people. And so as you're doing, you're going down the road, you're sharing each other's stories, you're talking about your families, your background, and all kinds of things like that. And so then because you've offered some practical help, then that family suddenly really trusts you. And so then as you do that for a couple of weeks and months, then you cross another milestone, which is friendship. And that's not just one-sided friendship. I get to learn as much as they're learning from me. And so we're sharing each other stories about each other. And then there's probably a third milestone that is what is our friendship about? And so right now, that's kind of where we are in Norcross. Is we have really deep friendships. At one point I was driving up to the neighborhood and they had a surprise birthday party for me, and the women just came out from a car and gave me flowers and gifts and stuff like that. So it was like probably a sign that our friendship is really deep. But then now it's, what are we going to become together? And what is it? How do we fight for each other's dreams and purpose? And so as those relationships really deepen, then you can also pull people into small groups. So that's usually a group of people that have something in common. So maybe you have a youth group, or you have a women's group. It also is very exciting because it could be as creative as you want. It depends on kind of the giftings within your team, but then also the needs of that community. And then you're just matching those kind of perfectly. So at some point we had kind of an English class that started, and there was this girl from Brazil who just said, well, as their parents are learning English, there should be someone that's with the kids so that it's easier to kind of go through the class. So she sat in kind of a staircase talking, going through math problems and things like that. But then she said, this could be the beginning of a tutoring center. This could be the beginning of something bigger. And at this point, it's something that has really grown. It's run by teachers that work for the county. And then it's really cool because it has a kind of year-round component to it where we have one-on-one tutoring, but then it culminates into this camp called Read, Write to Lead, where the whole city kind of becomes part of it. And we had over 200 volunteers this summer, and it was really exciting to be part of it. You're kind of walking up to a jungle full of life. And so that's kind of the exciting part about Love Your City, is that you can have these amazing small groups that then could become programs that then could be moved kind of across the nation. And then because our dream is to change a city, to turn it upside down, you need a ton of people to be with you in this adventure. So it's kind of exciting because you can invite businesses and churches and other nonprofits to be a part of it. And it's kind of exciting because we all want that huge adventure. And so this is a big adventure that we all get to be a part of.
We talked earlier about an Abbey being a place where you can belong before you believe. And what you're describing there over at Sarah Court Community through Love Your City is that, where people are, bringing their groceries home and somebody's helping them get the groceries inside and talking about how their week went some weeks, but then also where programs are being launched to help kids get through school, which helps families rise and the economically the whole neighborhood rise. But then over time, you are seeing moments where people face either things in their lives that are so big that they need to turn to a God who's the only person big enough to really help them, or where people's just hearts open because they see something in you, Jen, or the other volunteers or the people that are there, and they say, I'm not going to be able to make it if I don't get what you have. So there is a long space of belonging, and then there really have been some beautiful stories of people believing.
I was actually challenged maybe a week or two ago. Someone said, if someone meets you, they would know who your family is. Like, it's true. Every time you meet me, I'll show you pictures of my nephews and like my Christmas pictures. But if Jesus is one of the most important relationships, the most important relationship in my life, then they should get to know who he is also by relating with me. And so that's also what we're doing, is in the way that we go, we're sharing our lives, and they have to touch some of those faith pieces. And then it's all of us turning together towards him to see miracles happen. We've seen people be healed or delivered and different things like that. So every time we pray, the Lord has answered pretty dramatically.
Thanks, Jen. So Joey, this next one is for you. We've heard about some of the pretty amazing things that Jen and Molly are helping lead. Can you tell me a little bit about what this means for a youth group and the kind of youth group you guys are leading and what's going on there?
Yeah. First off, very excited to be on the show. My wife and I, Molly, we serve as the youth pastors at Covenant Life Church's youth group for about a year now. I think this is we're coming up on the anniversary of it. And we originally got involved in 2018, that as Molly and I were both coming to know Jesus in a really integral and meaningful way, the community from Covenant Life Church and Boyd the Ball were instructive in us in our growth. And so in that time, Molly and I were invited by some people who are on this call to be assistive in helping Covenant Life Church's youth group, which at the time was a really small youth group that we probably on average had maybe 5 kids a week. And that's probably being generous. I remember the first time I spoke, there were only 2 kids there, but I'm guessing it's because they heard who was speaking.
Scared one away.
And it was a great youth group, and there was a lot of life to it. And we would come in and we would say, one day this youth group is going to have 40 kids in it, and it's going to be one where you're bringing your friends to it and their lives are changing through it. And I'm pretty sure they did. And honestly, that we did as well, felt like it was just us fantasizing a little bit or dreaming. And as the youth group went along, Boyd the Ball put on a camp called Camp Overcomers in 2019, which was a really cool concept for a camp, which the tagline is that it's a camp within a camp within a camp, which is more confusing than what it actually is. But Camp Overcomers, unlike other youth camps, which are focused on nightly morning devotionals, nightly worship sessions, and then midday sports, it was the focus on what if youth came, and as they were being fed in the morning and in the evening, they were then sent out to care for young people in hurting communities. And they would put on two camps. They'd put on a camp here at Covenant Life Church, but then for all the 6 through 12-year-olds. And then they would also put on a camp over at the Sarah Court community that Jen was speaking about for the 6 through 12-year-olds. And the first year that we did it, we had about 40 campers, and about, I think 17 of them, probably about 7 of them were from Covenant Life Church, but 10 of them were coming from the Velocity program that Molly was speaking about, and from this Love Your City program that Jen was speaking of. And we were really uncertain about how the integration would go of 3 different communities of young people. And as they came and as they were touching on elements of who the Lord is, it was so transformative to each of them that it actually quickly became really beautiful, the relationships that are forming. People were relating across the lines of that they came in with. They were kids from Sarah Court were talking to kids that were from Covenant Life Church. A lot of these kids that we were inviting from Sarah Court or from Velocity didn't necessarily come with a faith background, but we were recognizing something was happening to them and we needed to invite them in. And so the Lord showed up and a lot of them met Jesus. And as we were ending camp, we were thinking, well, what do we do now? All these kids have met Jesus. And where do they go? So there was a second where we thought about having 3 different youth groups with alternating leaders that went to each one each week. And then they would gather together once a month. And that sounds confusing because it was confusing and it was exhausting. But then we quickly realized God did something by bringing them all together. And so how could we separate that? And so we invited the young people who weren't necessarily growing up within a faith context or not even growing up with our own church context to come into the Covenant Life Church's youth group. And what happened is young people kept growing, and young people who hadn't necessarily historically been able to were raised around concepts of the Bible and who Jesus is and just the word of the gospel. It was infiltrating them and they started to grow.
Yeah, so there's a lot in there because you guys just told 3 separate stories that became one story, which is extremely exciting. There's also so many dimensions of Abbey going on. Just the fact that a local church would turn and engage their neighborhood around them is exciting and is a piece of that where you're adding value to the lives around you. But then what you culminated with is the fact that you've created this youth group that is really where the 3 streams are kind of flowing together to create this dynamic group of young people that now is, going past the size that you used to you say you were going to reach, when you were a small youth group. So your dreams have come true. These kids are growing. There's so much that's happening. It sounds amazing. And I appreciate the way each of you have shared your story. There have got to be, when you do something unusual or you do something that isn't being done, and this is a question for all of you, and you guys we can throw it around, and Christine, you can jump in there too. There have got to be, when you're doing something that you've never done before, there've got to be challenges. There've got to be things that you did not think were going to happen that happen, or things that happen a lot that it's like probably another youth group that's just the kids who are there every Sunday show up on Saturday night aren't dealing with. So is that true? Like, what are the bumps in the road? What are the surprising pieces where they leave you thinking, oh my gosh, Lord, you're going to have to help us?
Yeah, I can jump in and say 2 different things. The first one I would say is just really quick. I think we quickly realized as a team that we were taking on some kids that were blank slates and had no, we would say things about Jesus, and they would be like, who's that? And then we would say, well, he died on a cross for us. And they said, what's a cross? And we said, well, they nailed him to a wooden cross so that it would cover our sins. And they said, what's a sin? And I said, well, it's da 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 da. And it kept going. We quickly realized that there would have to be a way for us learning how do we communicate across our own just general vernacular into what is relevant to a young person's heart, and where is Jesus actually moving, and how do we thread that needle of where a young person's heart is actually genuinely reaching out and calling out for something that can quench them. So that was a challenge for each of us, and I have to watch myself in any given week where I feel like, okay, we've established all these fundamentals of what the cross is, what sin is, what creation is, and then we get new kids, and all of a sudden we're starting over again, and we're going back in it. And Jesus helps us, and He launches us further ahead than I sometimes feel like we actually are. But it is always it's a challenge to how do you stay relatable and simple in your messaging in a way that it could go wide. The other thing I would say is, and I think this would be the common sense answer, but for a lot of people who are growing up in very homogenous settings, and who are going to a church that is filled with people they largely know and they share small groups with, and that they're seeing week to week, a lot of them have grown up in this church for a long time and now they're having kids. The idea of now opening up to your youth group and their faith foundation to being allowing of kids who aren't coming from necessarily that same context, that you don't know their parents, you don't know what their other kids' parents believe, you don't know what the kid believes, you don't know what's happening as they're called in, as they were allowing people who are from all different kinds of backgrounds in. And that took a certain level of grace and courage, really, and faith for what this group could be for the parents and the elders, and who are always very supportive, to allow this kind of adventurous concept for a youth group that was so missionally minded to take place. And along the way, what we saw was it was helpful. It was actually more helpful for young people within the church to have kids who aren't necessarily from a church background there. Because all of a sudden you have a kid who's grown up from Sarah Court, who has never really experienced faith background before. All of a sudden he's meeting Jesus, and there's something so vibrant happening in him. But there's kids from the church that are saying, oh, it's happening in him. Why isn't it happening in me? And then there's a little bit of a spiritual almost competition of urging each other forward in good faith. So it's been a challenge, but I think we've been, I would say the faith and the courage that this church body has had, and the grace for not always the best leadership, but to see, support us in what we're doing, and something that's a little bit of an anomaly of a youth group. It's been incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. One of the things we were talking about earlier was one of the things that young people are really searching for is authenticity. And I think everything you were just saying kind of points to that, where it's where you are, and then it's where they are, and it's not always what people expect. And you having to break down what anyone who grew up in the church would say as like really simple concepts. Oh, sin or faith. Or one of my favorite stories is about the kid who came the first time and freaked out when everyone closed their eyes to pray. And he was like, oh my God, why is everyone's eyes closed? So those kinds of things happening a lot, are really earnest and really neat to see.
I was just going to ask you guys to tell that story. So I'm glad you mentioned that. All right. Any other bumps, or are you guys ready for your next question?
I can go quickly. I think that there are a lot of bumps. I think as I'm sitting here listening to us talk and things, there's like more and more things coming to mind. So it's hard to pick a few things. I think when I first stepped into Velocity, or we first stepped into the youth group and things, like the nature of kind of this like Jesus without borders kind of thing, where it could be anything, was really challenging to me, because it requires, and it is really challenging to me. It requires kind of constant agility, because it can, the Lord doesn't do the same thing twice. Like, it's not the same story for any one of us. And so having the sensitivity to hearing the voice of the Lord, and to what's happening in a young person, to know to know how to be alongside them, and to obviously like always be authentically who I am and where I am in my story, but then also to know like what's happening in them. And especially in a place like Velocity, it's in the school, it's not inherently like a place that we're talking about the gospel every day or anything like that. It's a leadership development program, and so the agility to be sensitive to what the Lord is doing and to look for openings, and to then also be really brave, because it's what Jen said is true, that like if if someone knows me, they're going to know my family. If someone knows me, that then they're going to know my faith too. And that can be hard, and that can be challenging. But it requires kind of this constant agility and this constant returning to like, do I know what the Lord, like, what is the Lord doing in me? What is he saying for today? How do I go out? And then be alongside young people in moments where I'm not talking about faith, and we're talking about how to deal with the situation with your sister, or as they're starting to meet Jesus, how am I sensitive, and how am I submitted and close to him?
That's really great. So Jen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think something that has been challenging is that his kingdom is so countercultural. And so like in every interaction or in a youth group or whatever, even in the schools, we're sharing a gospel that's so unlike the rest of the way the world functions. So I have to learn, how does that look for my life? But then also if I'm leading something, then how do I share that with someone? And how do you talk about it in a way that's simple, like Joey was saying, but then how do you help someone make the decision to choose something that's different than the rest of their friends? Or even in conversation, how do you go deeper to a place that is genuine versus we can talk about our favorite movie or something like that, even though both of those things are kind of important in relationships. So that's one of the challenges.
It'd also be great to hear what are some of the beautiful things, like, obviously there's challenges, and in those challenges you guys said some pretty amazing things and breakthroughs, but what are some of the amazing things or stories that you've seen as you've kind of woven these three different populations together? Because they're pretty unique populations. Like you have a community in Sarah Court that is involved in Boy the Balls, You Love Your City and Neighborhoods initiative. And then you have Velocity mentoring happening in public schools. And then they kind of all come together in this youth group with a group of kids who've grown up in church. So when you kind of marry all those groups, what are some of the amazing things that have happened?
For Love Your City, one of the most amazing things is that people come in, it's the being part of belonging before you, or what Jamie was talking about earlier, is that people from different kind of backgrounds come and touch his life. And then because they're touching something that's so different and vibrant, that then their lives start changing. Like that's how I came around, was not because I was in a great place, but because I found something that was different and it gave me life. And so the cool thing is that people can come and be useful in his kingdom before they even realize that they're called. So that's kind of amazing. And then we've seen like amazing miracles. The other day we were at a youth group and I opened my eyes in the middle of worship and we were surrounded by like 30 young people who didn't come always from faith backgrounds, and they were worshiping and they were singing and they were crying out to the Lord. And we've seen people, like, as I mentioned earlier, be healed from different things. So it's like the thing that you read in the Bible, they're true and they're here.
That's great. What about you other two? Positive things, beautiful things.
I think it's again, the way that there's been a lot of bumps, there's again been a lot of really exceptional things that have happened. And I think of so many stories. I think that one of the things I was thinking is it's constantly amazing to me how the Lord is already working in everyone's life, and he's like going before us and behind us. And that there's so many situations where we have in a moment turned and said the gospel to a kid just as clearly as we can, or I've asked a question and a young person will turn to me and be like, yes, I've heard him speak, or yes, I know him. I remember like last week I was so sad, and in this moment the Lord said something to me and I tried it and it changed how the way my week was going. And that is the thing that's like, it's constantly happening. Like the Lord is working constantly. And like Jen was saying, I think it's been amazing the way that we've prayed and then asked the Lord for breakthrough. We've asked the Lord for something, even like things that are very specific. And then we'll go the next day to the community and he's done it. Or this week, even it was our first week back at Velocity and we prayed that the Lord would go before us and encourage the young people and that they would be excited to be there, which is not always the case. And as they came into Velocity this week, they were open, they were excited. The right word is that they were sweet. They hugged us. They were like, "We missed you." And that kind of breakthrough is not necessarily because of anything that we've done. It's the way the Lord is just constantly going before us and doing things and working things in that we get to then be a part of.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think there's so much of just where Jesus moves in a moment where it is really hard to have a youth group that it's hard to have just a standard youth group and move young people to action and faith. It takes the Lord coming and breaking through and doing something. And watching the way that there's been synergies around the electricity of having young people from different communities who are coming in and challenging each other has been wonderful. We have a leadership core for our youth group, which is just 3 of the kids who are kind of they're going for it with the zeal after the Lord. And watching the way that they come over to Molly and I's home one Saturday morning every month, and we brunch together and we pray about the youth group and we ask them how they're feeling. And there was just a day where they started turning and they just started talking about what they see in the Lord in each other. And the way they really see each other and they love each other. And these are one of the kids is from the Covenant Life Church, and then a couple of the others are from Sarah Court. And watching the way that there's not a sense of division at all. There's just a sense of where they're seeing each other in faith in a way that probably goes beyond what I had vision for when we first started this all. And it's really beautiful. And then even watching the way that one of the girls from the community was dealing with some real health issues, and then she goes to the doctor and finds out they did the X-rays again, and she's completely fine. And then she comes and gives that testimony at the youth group. And the week prior, one of the kids was saying, "Well, I don't think Jesus can do the things anymore that he did in the Bible." And all of a sudden, there's that story that comes through, and just watching the way it's affecting one another and the way that the Lord kind of jostles us and messes with us a little bit to move us into deeper things. It's beautiful. It feels like one of those organisms where you have the fish tank that has the algae that grows up top, that grows a plant. There's like all these different elements, but it's producing just a reciprocal, cyclical form of life. So it's really wonderful.
That's
The
great.
blessings outweigh the problems.
The thing that is also kind of cool about it is thinking back to that camp that keeps going now every year. And you start to see more and more of the team leaders are from the different communities. There'll be a velocity leader, and they each bring different skill sets. The velocity students have a lot of leadership, relational development that they bring to the table. Whereas the Sarah Court kids, they're part of each other's lives. They know what it is to fight for a community. They're very practically oriented. Whereas like the kids from the church, there's depth that they have from what's been invested in their parents and then been invested to them. And you never know what's going to happen. So it's all great. I guess the final question that we'd like to throw at you is that people are watching this who, aren't involved with you guys, but they're in their own cities and they're recognizing, wow, this is touching something that resonates in my heart. I love it. This is a growing leaders podcast, and they're hearing, like you just talked, the multiple layers of leaders growing. There's the camp leaders, there's the leaders of the youth group, there's the velocity leaders, there's you guys as leaders, there's the group around you of leaders. And they're saying, thank you, sir. Can I have another? Like they're saying, I want that. So if you were giving, whatever kind of advice that you could give or things that you think are probably true universally across, even whether it's true here in Gwinnett County or whether it be true in Cleveland or whether it be true in Gainesville, Georgia, like what would you say? What are a few points? And these would be kind of popcorn points as we're wrapping up.
I would say 2 points quickly. First is, and I'm always challenged by this, but we always talk about the law of the lid, that young people can only grow as far as you've gone. You can only take people places you've been before. And so I'm always challenged that as we're dealing something that's just true about a kid that's raised in the church, and it's as true as a kid raised out of the church, is that if it's not happening in me first, it can't go straight to them. And the Lord is obviously moving, but my ability to be used in it is cut short if I'm not growing, and I'm not growing in life in the Holy Spirit and hearing His voice. So I would say I would challenge you to push towards growth. And the other thing I would say is start. Start with however small. Get to know your own neighbors. Molly and I, there's a group of kids that gather at the tennis court um, every day, and they play soccer and they take down the nets. And Molly the other day went over and offered cookies, and they thought that maybe you shouldn't take cookies from a stranger, but we're gonna get to know our neighbors one way or another. Um, and how do you do as starting at just loving the people around you, and in the process of it starting to see how does that then weave into your small groups? How does that weave into your church? How does that weave into the mission fields that you see yourself growing in? How does that weave into your work and your family? How does it weave into the fabric of what the Lord has provided you as your sphere of influence? And then out of that, just be diligent and watch how it grows. This isn't something Molly and I are particularly good at moments. We're all right at it, and that's our best. But when we do it and when we function in obedience, there's tremendous fruit.
Yeah, with the obedience and fruit is, if you ever feel like it's uncomfortable, yeah, it is uncomfortable. Like it's uncomfortable sometimes to go out and do something, but then you find His grace. And so kind of my advice would be pushing through any place where it's slightly doesn't feel particularly comfortable, but then you get to see kind of miraculous things happen. So
That's great. What about you, Molly?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, I remember years ago, when I first met Christine, I told her that I didn't like working on teams. And that's really not true. I think one big thing that, as I think about, um, one of the most helpful things is that like I've never in any of this and in learning how to minister to young people and be ministered to, like never have I been alone. Like there's always been people that have been ahead of me in this, that I've been alongside, that they've been like, I don't know, they're freaking out and I'm freaking out. What do I do? What do I say to her? She's scared and I'm scared. And there's always, I mean, Joey and we're friends, but then we're also friends on a mission together. And it's better to have, I don't know, it matters that I've never been alone as I've gone up to try to learn these things, that I've found people who believe the same things as me, that are ahead of me and with me, and that we're going towards this bigger thing together. So that one's a big one. And then the other thing is that I think it was also Christine who told me that everyone is dealing with the Lord somehow, whether or not they know it. And so when I first began, remember getting really frustrated by the behavior of people, that they were acting out or that they were responding poorly or that kind of stuff. But that is responding to the behavior of people as you go out to try these things is not effective as much as responding to what the Lord has said to do. And then knowing that no matter how they respond, everyone is dealing with the Lord in some way. And so how am I faithful to what the Lord has said to do in my community and in this youth group and in Velocity and in Love Your City, knowing that what he is doing in their lives, will take time and is a process and is about them and Jesus the way it is for me and Jesus.
Thanks for spending the afternoon with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us. This has been a delight.
Well, that was really great. It's great to hear from them.
Yeah, they're all great leaders, and that's kind of an amazing story.
It is, but one of the things that kind of struck me or was highlighted for me was it isn't dissimilar from our conversation earlier. It's really kind of coming back to the basics. It's not big, it's not flashy. It's really, with Molly and her team, it's meeting people where they are in schools, and with Jen and all of us who are going out into Love Your City and neighborhoods, it's kind of meeting residents and people where they are, which is, what Jesus said, go and love your neighbors. And out of that, you marry those two groups with a group of young people from a local church, like what they're finding together is pretty amazing. But then their conversations aren't these super deep theological questions. It's really just, who is Jesus? do you hear him speak, and how do you obey his voice, and what is sin? It seems like it's an easy thing to kind of gloss over, and you can plan a million messages on these kind of bigger things, but really, what is sin? Who is Jesus, and how do you know him? So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and one of the things that, this is a podcast that's about growing leaders, and one of the things that Joey touched on a little bit is just the layers of leadership development by what they're doing. And the number one thing that creates it is that it's action oriented. Like it's action oriented for those three leaders, like what they're facing, to gather volunteers, to invite people into it, to go out and lead it. That is action oriented. But then to actually have to lead each of the things they're doing, that's action oriented. But then you look across each thing they're doing. Velocity, they're having to get high school kids to act by mentoring middle school kids. Jen Gomez is talking about mobilizing 35 volunteers every week, including people from churches and businesses and universities, to go. And then Joey's talking about getting a group of students to come into each other's lives and go. But then there's another level, which is then you're taking a group from this combined youth group and setting them out as leaders and saying, come on, grow in following Jesus by hearing his voice, by learning how to serve and fight for these other kids. So every single level of growing leaders is giving them an opportunity to have to take what they're hearing and act upon it. Faith comes from hearing, and hearing from the word of God. But faith in the Bible, the belief, is the Greek word pistos or pistoa, that is an action verb. It's an action verb. So faith is a muscle, and you're giving all these leaders a chance to grow in it, which is just amazing.
That is what Jesus did too. Like he didn't invite them into just sitting and listening to him speak. Like he invited them to go. Yeah. And so that's exactly what they're doing. Something that we don't really have time to dig into, but I thought was worth mentioning, is it's also a really great way to grow a diverse church.
That's a great point. Yeah, because if you're, your church is going to grow based on who your friends are. It's going to grow based on who you have relationships with. So the very nature of this is to take these very diverse groups and to create places of friendship and interaction.
Well, yeah, because if you really are going into the neighborhood, whatever the neighborhood is around your church or where your church is ministering, and then you really are going out into the schools and you're meeting the people of your community, and then friendships form and life is happening. And that's what's happened. And that youth group is pretty diverse.
Diverse on a billion different levels.
Yes.
Diverse in age, diverse in experience, all that stuff. One of the things that this podcast is all about is just creating opportunities for these kind of conversations. And today, we're going to try to keep these podcasts around half an hour. We'll see where we end up, but there was so much that was happening. It was beautiful today. But having really great voices here. And so sometimes we'll have young leaders. Other times we'll have church historians, theologians, spicy leaders from across the world. And it could be, you, if you're listening to this, it could be, as we get to know you. But the opportunity to hear actual stories while then also talking about the things that are important to each of us, the challenges we face, and what God's answers are, and how we can go from a place of friction to traction. So we're excited to have everybody involved. It's going to be great, great stuff. What is the final dynamic, amazing words you would say to everybody, Christine?
I would say thanks for joining us. And I personally am really excited to be a part of this conversation. I think it's an important conversation. What are we going to do about next generation leaders? It's not about just this current generation, but how do we weave in the conversation with the next generation and past generations, and bridging the gap into who is Jesus and what is he calling us to together?